And where are you?
Pennsylvania, not about 100 miles from Philadelphia, 100 miles from New York City, and that's in that corner of the eastern part of the U.S. Yeah.
Great, great. Uh, I'm going to ask you lots of questions in a minute. I'll do a little intro, and then I'll ask you lots of questions. Well, not really a lot of questions. Um, but if you could introduce yourself.
Okay.
Uh, so, I mean, I think you've obviously done a lot of things, but
All right.
the psychic things is what interests
Yeah.
me. And I'm sort of interested, unlike, well, maybe, I think a little bit differently. I'm interested uh, in your story, as it were.
All right.
So, okay, I'll do a little intro. Oh,
There are a lot of ways to go with my stories. I don't know which avenue we go down. We'll see what happens.
yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Discover Energy Work. Today we've got a really special show. I have Dale Graff here, and I Dale is obviously famous for the remote viewing project, but there may be other things which we want to explore. So I'm quite excited about that. Dale, how do you introduce yourself? I mean, you've got a lot of qualifications, obviously, but I mean, how do you normally introduce yourself to?
Well, I'm Dale Graff. I live here in Eastern Pennsylvania, not too far from New York City or Philadelphia. But I grew up in this part of the country. I went to local schools here in the country and grew up in a rural area, a farming community, Pennsylvania German background. And I went to Penn State University. I got a degree in aeronautical engineering. And later, I got a degree in physics. I worked in the aerospace industries for about 10 years, and then I gravitated to the intelligence community and spent my career with in technical intelligence work in Washington, D.C. But along the way, I've done a lot of interesting things, at least to me anyway. I became an avid canoeist, an outdoor enthusiast, and a lot of backpacking and hiking. But I also do a lot of exploratory work with dreams and precognitive dreams, in addition to my involvement with later on when I became involved with remote viewing research. And I ultimately became connected and actually the director of the Stargate unit, where we actually had viewers, people we call remote viewers, to uh, seek out information and locate missing airplanes and things like that. So that's a really quick rundown of me. I can go in various directions from here.
It's fascinating. Now, I'm curious, have you had um, before you came into the remote viewing area and the psychic area, had you had psychic experiences?
Well, I grew up in this isolated part of the country. We didn't have any electricity back there, so it was really quite primitive, even though we're not that far from a village or town. So in that sort of isolated environment, I had a lot of time alone, so to speak.
Hmm.
We didn't really have much going on there in the farm, and it was isolated, but it's a lovely place to grow up in. So it became very attuned to nature, and I had a lot of dreams as a child, and I remembered dreams. And some of them had information I should not have known about. I call them precognitive dreams.
Can you tell us, give us an example? Just
Yeah, at that time I didn't know what to call them. The dreams I had, people that would all of a sudden unexpected guests would show up, and we didn't even have a radio there at that time. So it was really, I don't want to say primitive. I never thought of it as primitive, but
Hmm.
so the dreams about unexpected visitors, incidents around the farm, and that.
So
So that
how old were you when that first happened?
Oh, probably 5, 6, 7, in that roughly in that time frame. And
And
but that didn't last long. I went to After I got to elementary school, I kind of lost interest in that. They didn't happen as frequently, and I
what
became
were
more.
your parents? Did you talk to anyone about it? I mean, like you're having this dream, I'm assuming you
Yeah,
wake up in the morning and
yeah.
maybe you don't mention anything, but like when the people do show up or
Yeah,
Did you
I
talk
just
to anyone
dream
or?
about people that would show up later that day or the next day or I shouldn't have known about, or people even surprised my parents that were showing up. And then little incidents around the farm, about the things that might happen to one of the animals. There was nothing really significant,
Did
but
you talk to anybody about it? That's what's curious for
no,
me.
I didn't really talk about this very much. I think one time I did, and kind of unusual remarks. That's only a dream. Don't nothing to it. But I ignored that, and it wasn't until years later I learned that some of the dreams I had could be classified as lucid dreams. Where you actually know in the dream that you are in a dream state. So and moving around in this what I call theater of the mind
Yes.
in dream. So I had those. I didn't have a name for it, but later on I learned that it's a tradition from the Tibetan uh, historical areas of dream yoga. So I was actually practicing dream yoga. I didn't even know it at the time,
Mm, mm.
entering dreams while still awake. So I didn't really know. At that time, the boundary between sleeping and awake was really thin for me. But
So you're
eventually,
like a sort of a daydreamer as well, were you?
yeah, you could say that. Yes, daydreaming, visualizing things easily, and I could. I also had a good visualization ability, and so I could imagine things. They almost seem very real. But in lucid dreaming, it's really hard. Sometimes you don't realize it's a dream. You think this is real, until something odd happens. Then you say, "Well, that can't be real because it's not realistic." Something
Right,
just flow uphill or something. So this weird stuff happens.
right. We go from that childhood. I mean, that's your earliest, psychic experience. After that, was there anything else that happened that was?
Well, during high school years, no, I became very caught up in the athletics part of it. I played tennis and, I was, really active physically and I got caught up in the academic stuff. Became very interested in physics and science. I was really more shifting over to the logical side of my brain. And,
Mm,
earlier it was not logical at all. It was more intuitive and creative.
mm,
So nothing much happened till probably about the mid 20s, about 25 or so. When, I had a really minor incident, but it became inflamed and I got very sick. And during this period of isolation, I had, again, I thought I was get out of bed and started walking around, went out in the street and looked at the children playing and the new cars that were in the area. Then I realized, well, I shouldn't be here because I'm too sick to be walking around. Then it occurred to me, well, this is this is like being out of body. How did I get out here? And
right,
then all of a sudden I'm in the bedroom look at me lying on the bed, and no, I gotta wake up, and then I woke up. So it was a really odd experience, but you could label it as a lucid dream or as an OBE, on the body experience. I don't know. So, that really got my attention. How can I have that
yeah,
experience?
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
understand. And
yeah.
so you're out of body, but your out of body experience is very much like a day-to-day experience of walking
Yeah,
around.
yeah,
Yeah.
the environment was so real. It was fixed. It didn't bounce around like an ordinary dream does, where your boundaries are all over the place, even if they exist at all. But this is a very stable kind of experience, and that's why it fooled me
Mm.
into thinking that I'm really awake out walking around out here.
You,
So yeah, it's an odd
you,
experience.
yeah, yeah. And you're 25 years old. I mean, like you're in an age where you kind of, I mean, me at 25, you think you know everything, yeah, and you're quite confident, and then suddenly something like that. I mean, it's similar for me because I was 25 as well when I had my experience.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Sure.
it did it shake you up a bit and like go, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Well, yeah, when I was lying there figuring out what happened, I said, "How could this be?" So it did rattle me. Made me start thinking about reality more and going back to what is time and space. Things are really strange. So
Mm,
I began to really think about fundamental things, not just engineering things. And that's what drifted me deeper and deeper into the study of physics and quantum physics. But ultimately, I came back to the phenomenon itself and, you know, got hold of, later learned about the works of J.B. Ryan at Duke University and the
mm,
early days of parapsychological research. I learned, a few years later, came across the works of the Maimonides dream telepathy work in the sleep laboratories in Brooklyn, New York. And so I got all that background. I got to know people in the area that had
So you went
fellowship.
out and you started reading books and studying and meeting people.
Yeah, I not only the history of the field and experiences like this, but also into the psychological side as well. And I actually took some time and studied the psychiatric literature as well. It's really going nuts. It's just really an hallucination, which is the word I don't like because that's just sort of demeaning the experiences. But
So yeah, I mean, I again a similar experience for me when I started perceiving energy,
yeah,
out of the body and you know, kind of like
yeah.
am I going nuts? And I was very afraid of talking to people about it. I didn't feel that if I talked to people about it, if I said there's all this energy there, I would sound schizophrenic. Um,
Yeah, you're
and
right.
I've managed, well, maybe I am, but
Yeah.
but or maybe I was. There's a sort of natural fear. So did you talk openly to people about it, or do you sort of keep it very much cards close
No,
to your chest?
at that time and that experience, I did not, because I just felt uncomfortable mentioning it. I needed to do more research in this and maybe re-experience some aspect of it, to see if it's repeatable. And so I began looking deeper into dream work and came across Carl Jung's work, which really attracted me. Now I had studied Freud and Adler and some of the other names in the the pioneers in
Mm,
psychological thinking
mm,
in those at that time. But Jung's work really resonated with me because you got into the concepts of the collective unconscious, depth psychology, and looking at symbols, the symbols
mm.
from the unconscious, and I could relate to that even from ordinary dreams. I still kept having those as well. So yeah, so Jung was a really a good find when I came across that whole body of literature that he
Mm,
produced in his
mm,
doctorate career. So and then again, I worked with people in the area later on in the communities, and worked with groups of people that, and then we explored our own abilities and set up experiments and tried to figure out where people were visiting or traveling. So I did experiments with local people and found that I didn't have too much trouble locating individuals that had that interest and also had some abilities as well. So I guess I was surprised, but it was a good thing I did that because I was not able to talk about people
right.
about
But
these experiences.
it was a good
Yeah.
response. I mean, I think it's a good response, especially bearing in mind what you were going to do later. Is you like I understand. If you've looked at Adler, Freud, and Jung, you've
Yeah.
already like, well, okay, I can see this from this point of view. I can see it from this point of view. I can see it from this point of view. And then quantum physics, and I think isn't there something like where a particle can be somewhere and somewhere else at the same time? Um,
Yes. When I
is it quantum
got
entanglement or?
Yeah, when I got into graduate school and started looking at that, that's pretty weird stuff too. So the idea of ESP, which is a term J.B. Ryan coined back in the 1920s and 30s. So that didn't seem any more mysterious than what's called entanglement, which is the idea that elementary particles, when they link together in a certain parameter at the quantum level, they remain connected. So if you tweak one, its partner, wherever it is in the universe, knows that it's been tweaked. So this says bonding that transcends the speed of light. It's instantaneous, and distance doesn't matter. And that's pretty weird stuff.
That's
You know,
weird. And I would always say to people, because people say that's proof, I say, no, it isn't actually proof, but it is interesting. Um,
yes, yes, and entanglement has actually been demonstrated enough times to say it's been proven. And of course, a lot of the
that's been
physics.
proven, but that doesn't prove that somebody can be psychic. That's what I'm saying. It's like
Oh,
you can
I
prove
do. Yeah.
somebody entanglement, but proving somebody is psychic is way harder.
Yeah, it's such a minor, in a minor analogy because we're talking about elementary particles, and you need when you talk about a person's ability, you're talking about a huge amount of data that flows through our brains when we have these impressions. It's
Yeah,
not just a bit. It's a whole flooding of imageries that
right.
come in. So there's more to it than that. But it's a stepping stone, so to speak, to get ourselves across murky waters, so we
Right.
don't
Right.
too deep.
So you're
Hmm.
25. So from 25, you'd had this one experience of out of body, which was like I can really imagine. I've had, mine out of body experiences. Apparently my inner body doesn't like going out. It's a bit of a hermit, and it likes to hang out in here. But I've still had the experience of like, yeah, I'm over there, or I'm by location where you feel like you are somewhere else and you're here at the same time. Just, couldn't be more weird. But so I've got what I'm saying is I understand where you're coming from and how that can shake things up. So, and you had your dreams. What sort of happened then? What was the next?
Well, so I had I don't know, it's more than academic interest. I had a practical interest in it too. If I can have this, and my colleagues and people I work with, if they can have this every now and then, why can't it be more regular?
Right.
And so this is then really what I did when I set up some study courses and I had people learn how to recall dreams more reliably. And then program, I don't like that word particularly, but to set the intention to have dreams about things that may be coming their way in the future. So shifted my focus then to looking at precognitive dreams. Um, so these are very helpful because you really get alerts to avoid things or be prepared for things, and even though you may not be directly involved,
This
you
is really interesting. So, was that during your intelligence work? Is that something you can talk about? Like
yeah.
the
Well, see this. Oh, what we're talking about right now is my own personal stuff that gave me the background.
Right.
So
Okay. So you were running studies. So
yeah,
it wasn't a study in a university backed by
no, no, of course, I grabbed books, whatever I could find that was in the journals, in the peer-reviewed journals, like the Journal of Parapsychology. And in England, there was a publications at the Society of Psychical Research, and that started in 1884, I believe. That's a really still a viable organization. So those journals were valuable. I did that. But then in my own work, because I was moving around quite a bit in the aerospace industries, and I had an opportunity to join the intelligence organizations, and I did that in 1964 or so. And then with an area, a facility was known at the time as the Foreign Technology Division in Dayton, Ohio. So I moved there to take an analyst position for them because my background was on rocket and missile propulsion, and it fit in with the analysis they were doing on
hmm,
you know, analyzing Soviet systems. So, and during this time, I still had all this interest in ESP and all.
hmm.
I came across works in the Soviet that had to do with ESP. It's sort of guarded and hidden in some of the technical journals, but I was able to dig it out and have it translated, and that became of interest in our organization, and that led to a connection and that occurred for me to become involved with research I hadn't known about until fairly recently. At that time, with the researchers, they're doing what's called remote viewing research at the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. So they were looking for sponsors to continue their research because the previous sponsor was not going to renew the contract for political reasons. So our organization picked it up, and I became that contract manager. So now all of a sudden, here I am, someone who's just messing around with people, enjoying ourselves and doing homemade projects, not even basic research, but it's just things to explore what we can do ourselves. Now here all of a sudden, here I am involved in a formal research activity.
Fascinating. I'm fascinated, it just I'm fascinated in the process because it sounds like you had you were doing things and mucking around, which I'm interested. I would like you to elaborate on that. But
Yeah.
also, it's like this idea of, I mean, how did you come across? I'm actually reading ESP Wars right now, and it's
Mhm.
fascinating to see, what was going on over there.
Yeah.
Um, in the Soviet times. And I think it's very hard for people now to even understand what we were living through during the Cold War. I mean, I think you lived through more, obviously more of the Cold War than I did. But I mean, it's very, very hard for people to even have any concept of what that was like.
Yeah, because where I grew up, we had these what's called ground cellars. It's just a place you kept vegetables in. It was just a like a cavity that people built in the ground, and you covered it over. It just for vegetables, as storage throughout the year. Well, we were considering those as bomb shelters. So
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
very real. People don't realize that, what it's like, when you grow up in this environment too. Not just with the end of World War II, but then the Cold War situation that began right there. You don't realize what it's like when the possibility of not heavy duty bombs, but even the atomic bomb could be dropped. So it's a horrible the mentality to have to as a kid or even as an adult to exist in. So that was sort of damping everything in a way at that time. So
Totally.
yeah.
And then you got hold of, did you get hold of like Soviet research as an intelligence analyst on what they were doing on ESP? I mean,
Yes, as I started digging into the literature, and again, this was not the topic that we normally did because we were a technical analysis outfit. We didn't look at what was called, psychological or things of that nature. But once I started digging into it and covering it in our organization, it became of interest at the command level, and I was asked to keep track of it. And of course, then I wrote reports, which are actually were published by the Defense Intelligence Agency, and of the work I put together. And so, yeah, sure, I accumulated a lot of this classified literature. I had a lot of it translated. There was a lot floating around anyway in the public. I didn't realize at the time either. But
hmm,
but I documented what was really out of the journals, out of the technical journals, and what we had from our usual ways of obtaining information to other means other than open literature. So yeah, I pulled that together, and that sort of was a baseline for a lot of the work that we did later on as well, in terms of replicating some of that work and studying it more from a theoretical point of view as well. In fact, I was able to set up some experiments to check that out. And the only thing we could really say conclusively was that the phenomenon, whether it's called remote viewing or ESP or precognitive dreaming, is not related to electromagnetics, which is not a carrier wave out
what
there.
was the experiment that you did? What was that?
Well, I just set up several. One was having an individual. Well, what we called them remote viewers. People that had the ability to describe distant scenes. It had to do with it's an extension of ESP, you might say, or clairvoyance. But it was a very specific application where can individuals sit down, relax, and perceive a scene, thousands of miles away. And we were able to replicate that to a fair degree of accuracy, and not just in short distance laboratory experiments, but people actually traveling around. And we were trying to identify the area that they was in at the time that we had no way of guessing.
And
So
that was before you were in the unit managing the Euro or the director of the unit.
this is before that, yeah. So yeah, we did those experiments, and that gave me confidence that this really is a viable thing. So one of the experiments having to do with the theoretical part was having I went into a deep cave, unbeknownst to the remote viewer who was say 500 miles away, and she was able to describe very accurately what was the environment that I was in. So now we're going through the ground here to 500 feet, and that should have blocked out electromagnetics. Then
Right,
later on, we set up an experiment where the remote viewers were inside a deep diving vessel that went down to 500 feet in salt water. And they were able to describe randomly selected sites or places 500 miles away on shore. And we did it vice versa, where an individual on the shore could describe randomly selected pictures that were in a ship in sealed envelopes. So it worked. So, and this is
and
really for
who are your I mean, who was your viewer? I mean, that sounds fascinating.
yeah. So and this worked, and here we are. That either the picture target or the individual is in deep down in salt water in a really thick steel hulled vessel. No electromagnetics could get there. So
Right.
that has any kind of reasonable data rate. So that pretty much eliminated in our minds the fact that we're dealing with electromagnetics. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're standing in front of a high beam, high energy system that they like the waves ain't going to affect you in any way. But it may have some influence
Right.
on ESP perception or remote viewing. But that's a biological thing. But I'm talking about the basic phenomenon. So here we are back with no explanation of how this could work if it's not electromagnetic. So that's what brought me and my colleagues back into the quantum physics world to look at it. But
Amazing.
that's as far as you can go with it. So right now, there is a connection in some way, at least you might say symbolically or in some analogous way. So yeah, we put that aside and say, well, that's fine. Let's see what we need to do with it. How accurate can it be? What are the parameters that can allow you to be improved, or what doesn't work too well? What
Right.
are the psychological or physiological variables? Does the background of the individual have a lot to do with it?
Yeah.
So yes, so you can look at these parameters.
It's a
I
very
mean,
good question. I'm curious. So this would you kind of had your own remote viewing unit before the unit?
yes, right. That happened also. Now, when I became involved with Dr. Harold Putoff and Russell Targ, who were the researchers at the Stanford Research Institute, and got involved in the actual contract connections. I also located people, or I should say they located me in my organization. And I just started working with them to see if we could, replicate the same kind of experiments that were going on in the laboratory, and also expand on that too. I'm situated in a classified environment, and so now I have people that have clearances, so I don't have to be too worried about anything that we might be doing leaking out to the public. So because we didn't really want people to know anyone what we were doing
Right.
for political reasons as well. A lot of individuals at that time would not did not really believe in this, and so and that's true today as well. But it's even more so in the 70s. So yeah, I found people, and not many, just three, four, sometimes it might have been five, and I did work with them. Did experiments, and I had this informal group there at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base when I was with the Foreign Technology Division. This is before I moved to Washington, D.C., and ultimately became connected with the Fort Meade unit later on.
Right.
So, yeah, I did that.
Fascinating. I didn't know that. So there was there was SRI, there was your little group, and then obviously there was something
Yeah,
going
and
on.
a couple of years after that, the group in Fort Meade came together and established that unit in the facilities on Fort Meade.
Yeah.
So, but that was later
Did
from
any of your group go to Fort Meade or not?
no, I'm the only one. When I left the Air Force and went down to went to Washington D.C. to join the Defense Intelligence Agency and to continue on this similar work because the Air Force actually I was almost ordered to get out of it, and that's a long political story. I don't want to get into it really even too deeply. But I moved to Washington D.C. and then shortly became a kind of a coordinator with the Fort Meade unit that was just now really building up as well in 1979, 1980, when I moved down here as well. So, and then I worked with them and did coordinated projects in addition to what they were working with through their own chain of command.
What
And
was
then,
that very like being because I mean I'm
yeah,
I'm not of the intelligence agency, you know. My background is in healthcare and martial arts, which really, you know,
oh,
it's just totally not related. But was there a lot of cloak and dagger in getting you? I mean, not cloak and dagger, but like we'd say, was it very secretive, the idea of getting you to become the director of the program?
well, no, not really. It was just one of those things that evolved. I was involved, coordinating because the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, is the overseer of all military intelligence. So we were sort of a management organization in principle. So it wasn't any big issue being connected there with the Army unit. You know, we did this all the time with different organizations. We had representatives in different places, different parts of the world all the time. So that's not an issue. And
It was easy. It was easy to move to be the director, as it were.
yeah, well then when the Army for various reasons decided not to continue the activity at Fort Meade, our organization, the DIA, actually absorbed or picked them up, or they were transferred to the DIA from the management point of view,
Right,
as well as physical. So we kept the same building and we just paid rent to the Army to use it. And because, and I also wrote new positions to justify that movement of accepting the people from Army into that unit, which really, they just stayed there. They didn't have to move anywhere.
right,
And then when that was set up later on, then I was transferred up there years later to become the chief of the unit. And it was at that time when the name Stargate comes into the picture because we had different code names for the project up to this time.
right.
Oh, the Real Flame, Center Lane, the Sun Street, all these different in special access programs. You always usually have a code name which itself is also classified. So, and that just identifies this as a special access, a limited access to it. And
Mm.
there were reasons for that. You wanted to protect the identity of the people. You wanted to protect the identity of who you were actually working with. So there are lots of reasons for having that. And of course, in intelligence and what we were doing, we certainly didn't want that to get out. There's too many negativities
Yeah.
on the top. and
Absolutely.
plus there was fear about all kinds of stuff. So
So,
yeah,
but
so
you'd gone there. Can I ask you a question? Because I'm kind of curious. You'd gone from your group and experimenting, and then suddenly you're director of a group which is doing operational targets. So there's a
yeah.
couple of questions. One is like, how is it to manage a group which potentially, I don't know about therapists. I mean, I know about therapists, but I don't know about remote viewers and psychics. They're all prima donnas. They all want to be like the important person. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
worry about
okay. And I can speak for myself as well. I think I'm guilty of that as well. So yeah, but um, and then what were the incredible experiences that intelligent successes that you experienced?
Well, over the years, there are some really, really tall poles in the tent here. Now we of course didn't. We had some things that were couldn't evaluate. We were uncertain about, and some things didn't work out that well. But there were some really top-notch results as well.
Hmm.
And some of the early ones had to do with predicting the emergence of systems that were unknown before, that were unexpected before, whether it be a submarine or a new airplane that was being developed in the Soviet Union, or the high energy weapon system. So those things occurred earlier, but some of the more
Can you
dramatic things.
remember like going on into a because I think the fun is in the detail, in that like you've sent somebody on a target and then suddenly they get this kind of completely unexpected, maybe I don't know, but unexpected result, and then do you have to sell it? I mean, do you have to argue with people or just say like this could be? Do you have anything to confirm it? I've got no idea.
You don't want to sell this. You want to say, here's the data. It's up to you, the user, the people that uh, came to you with the task or with what is the unknown. Um, so you just present your best estimate. If a number of people work on this thing, there's always going to be a variation in what the input, what the results are, which can be sketches or even verbal descriptions.
Hmm.
So the challenge as a manager then is to, if they're diverse, how do you really prioritize this? It's a challenge, but you put together a packet and you do prioritize it to the best of your ability of judgment on at that point, and let the people that came in with the task come back and tell you whether it was good or not or what happened to it. And I'll give you an example here. And this is later on. These are easier to understand and to illustrate. But one time, an individual, and this is later on when the Cold War was kind of winding down in a way in the late 80s.
Yeah.
So we had diverse top projects, not just what's going on in the Soviet Union. We were brought into homeland security issues, drug trafficking, powders, fugitives.
Yeah.
So there's one illustration where an individual was on the most wanted list. Now, when individuals get internationally put on that list, they become fair game for any intelligence organization. So we were asked to see if we could locate that individual. So yeah, sure. I worked with a number of people in that, and there was one individual that did well on the people type projects, just describing personalities, for example. Others did information too, but I passed the information on to the contact in the customs department, and it was what was passed on was a description of a place in Wyoming, a campground, and details like that. And it was the idea that the fugitive is is at a campground in that part of Wyoming, the northwest side, even the town mentioned.
Lowell or something like that.
Yeah. So that information went to the field units in what's called a BOLO, be on the lookout, and to alert the law enforcement people in that vicinity to be on the lookout this particular individual. And of course, you provide them with whatever information you have on that, even though you might have looked differently 3 years later than he did at the time he disappeared. So, and that alert policeman actually did see an individual that resembled this person, and that led to his apprehension in a carefully orchestrated event so that nobody got shot. So there was something set up for that, a decoy situation to get him out of the trailer without any shooting going on. So it was a coordinated effort between the FBI, local law enforcement, and of course ourselves in terms of the information that we had provided. So yeah, it's just a few little sketches and a statement that went on, and then it was like any intelligence process. You coordinate it with whatever other sources you have. In this case, there were no other sources, but other than alerting people in a particular area. And it turned out the individual really had been moving from campground to campground in the U.S., even though the people that tested for this to locate the individual thought he was not in the U.S. at all. He was in the Caribbean and some other
Right.
South America.
Right.
So it went contrary to expectation. And that many times happens when we work with this data. The individual will say, well, that really doesn't make sense to me. Well, later on, it may when you discover that it was correct. So,
Yeah,
so that I just
what you're saying is interesting. I think it was Angela Ford gave the
I have,
name.
yes, you're right. I happen to choose hers because it's an easy one to talk about. So yes, I'm saying.
Um,
And there were
she's
other inputs, but they all centered around the Caribbean. And so I had to make a choice. Which one do I go with in terms of passing it on to the customer? Because you usually only get one shot at this, I can't give them five possibilities. So
right.
so I was fortunate that I made that choice. But um, I had a hunch that she was probably more Gruff because she's very good with working with people. And so that was what swayed me in that direction. Oh, there were other examples too that I could cite here, but I just pulled that because it's a fairly easy one to talk about.
Well, also, I mean, I think what people don't realize is, or I imagine people when they're watching, they don't realize is it was an international. It's like all law enforcement were after this guy. Like everybody's looking for him.
Yes, right. It was Interpol and all those other really top level agencies or sources that put out alerts. Everybody, and
Hmm.
this is the 3 years. In the U.S., he was listed on what's called the 10 Most Wanted. It was a TV program that ran frequently that cited the most wanted fugitives in the country at the time. So he was on that list as well. So yes, he was wanted by a lot of people,
Right.
but
And
nobody
then it's
find
a
him.
very different way to approaching information gathering to go and ask somebody where is the person.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah. It's
sure. That it's a bit different from what we had been doing. I described was at this location and with our abstract methods of doing it. Yeah. So, or what can we expect next week at this facility or next month? So we're looking ahead in time here as well. So one of the technology sites with another individual that worked on with this. It was going into the future. His Soviet location, and again, we're using abstract methods, so there's no photograph or anything other than the abstract cueing or referencing, which has no information in it at all. It's just numbers that
they
allow
get
you
a
to.
code number and say this is your target,
Yeah, I'm
one
sure
two five seven nine.
some way, right, some way of latching on to the concept that this will work. And it's to keep your mind away from imagining things that are just out of your own imagination and allow you to go deeper into the subconscious and a lot of the subconscious mind to figure it out. I mean, what else can you do? It's saying, when I do this for dream work, I say, dear subconscious mind, you know what you're doing. I don't, so go do it. Something
Right.
like that. So
Right.
yes, so then in this case, I'm talking about the individual. One of the military guys actually started describing something that only he didn't really like what he was perceiving, just a flash of blue light and a little bit of a dome and all that. So yeah, you think it's not a lot of data, but it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So I just had him summarize it and logged it in and sent it forward to whoever was interested in that area. I was directly involved at the time, and because I was blind to it as well, I didn't know what the place area was. And then, of course, we didn't get a lot of feedback on that, but we did. We were then informed what we were originally targeted for, which really didn't look like an interesting area. There wasn't much there. But 6 months later, the buildings showed up, and the analysts that analyzed photos identified as a potential high energy laser development facility. And the blue light indicated that this really was in a certain spectrum of that radiation of a blue laser, probably used for communication. So yeah, so the little flash of blue light and the little dome was all you needed to know to say, yeah, in the future, there's going to be a development showing up here that has to do with some form of laser development system, maybe for communications or maybe something else. So that was I thought, a nice contribution to how we were able to predict in advance. And of course, then individuals, if they took it seriously, and they did, then they could say, well, yeah, well, then we should have more coverage of this area. And the satellites that passed over it and do it a little more frequently, so being more up to date and technical intelligence of this, which happened. So that's how this should work together. And in this particular example, I think it did. It came through very, very nicely. So that's just
Right.
I
I
was
haven't
just
heard about that one before, so that's kind of very interesting.
yeah. Well, see, there's a lot here you could go into, but I
Yeah.
don't like to talk about the technical aspects so much. But that was a nice one. It was fairly straightforward. And then there was another individual that came on with we were doing predictive work, and the impression was just a ship being attacked. Okay, well, then there's some sketches, some details in the Persian Gulf area, but the reason expected that would be happening. But then 3 days, 2 days later, the attack did occur in this particular submarine, thought to be sort of an accidental thing, that could never be proven, but there was an attack. So we were able to show that
There was
even
an attack on the submarine in the Gulf, and you
yeah, it was not a submarine. It's just an ordinary. It was a Navy destroyer.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. But there was no way anybody would predicted that through ordinary methods. So, so that see that moves into the precognitive aspects too. And this whole when you really start getting into this, you really wonder what is even the nature of time. Even in the middle of these practical experiments, you can't help but wonder what kind of universe do we live in? How can we know this stuff?
Right.
Um,
Right.
whereas, after I left and retired, so to speak, which I never really did, so I'm still going strong
Yeah, right.
all these years. No, I did work with precognitive work and worked with future news 3 to 7 days ahead. And some of the results my colleague and I came up with were really quite accurate in terms of
Yeah, this is fascinating. Sorry, so when you left the unit, you worked for Future News. Is
yeah.
that an organization?
No, this is after I retired. This is something I did on my own.
Right.
Group I worked with. And the concept behind this project was can viewers or dreamers or psychics predict accurately a picture that will be published on a certain page in a certain newspaper 3 days from now or 7 days from now, and I mean accurately. So our criterion is pretty tough. You had to have it really close to what is actually published, printed in the newspaper. Otherwise, you couldn't say it was a good hit or not. It had to be good or nothing, basically. So we had tough standards here.
That's very hard. That's
Yeah.
really hard because
Oh, yeah.
number one, you don't have what's published in the newspaper isn't necessarily correct. It could be the truth, but not all of the truth. And yeah,
Well, I was restrictive. There was a constraint on this. The particular newspaper that we worked with had a very consistent page where it only had photographs of anything around the world that would be of interest. So it was not political. There was no advertisement. So it was a really neat page to have because you could rely on it being unpredictable. You could rely on it not being what I call running news. What's going on in the latest political flap, uh, or some riot. It wouldn't be anything like that, but it would be even some unusual activity that just hadn't made no sense. But if you could perceive it accurately, it makes the case that you were able to reach ahead in time before the photograph was even taken, and before the editor could even decide what
right,
photograph to
right.
use. I talked to the editor of that magazine, of that newspaper, and he told me that normally they get about 100 pictures that you want to choose from the Associated Press, and then you just choose one that looks interesting to them. And this is a day after the photograph was taken. It could be anywhere, sent anywhere around the world, from anywhere. In fact, there was one of the examples was I used in a report I wrote later when I summarized this. By the way, it became published in a physics document, so it carried some weight in the physics community.
Right.
But this was an attack in Indonesia on a ship. And this is 3 days before it happened. So, and then there were other pictures that were really mundane, a crazy looking clown in Brazil walking around at a carnival. But that's the picture. But that's 4, that's 7 days ahead.
You're viewing your result, aren't you? You're viewing the paper's picture,
Yes,
right?
correct. But the
Not
picture
yeah,
doesn't.
not the place, as it were.
Well, see, this is where the debate comes in.
Okay, cool.
We were interested in the future, regardless of how you perceive it. Are we describing the picture that we then see later on that doesn't exist yet? Or is it the actual scene that was photographed that we just happen to have to evaluate? So which comes first? Did we access the site or the photo?
Yeah,
So
that would be my question there.
yeah, see, in this case, the objective was the photo because we wanted to evaluate it accurately. So
Correct.
if you come in with a site, it could be looking at it from any direction, up, down, left, right. So you may have a good sketch, but it just doesn't match the photo. The judge will say, "Well, that's not a good fit," even though it is of the same site. If you look around carefully enough.
Hmm.
So we constrained it to just that because our
It's
objective
much
was
harder.
not whether it's a site, but whether it's ahead in time. And the important part of this was the photograph in the event had not yet occurred. That's the important aspect of this particular exercise. And that's why I got attention of this physics group that we eventually published a paper for.
Right.
So that's an issue. So we're now getting back to the removal viewing material. Um, when we intended to describe a distant scene or what's going on at a remote site, say somewhere, and using our abstract method, were we actually there at that time, or were we ahead in time? My answer is it depends what the intention was. Like the example I gave you earlier with that laser, that was ahead in time at that site. And of course,
Yeah.
we would not have known that had somebody had satellite photography not affirmed the information 6 months later. and this is also true for the submarine prediction that was occurred earlier in the program. We would not have known that had somebody photography not been available 3 months later to verify it. So do we have a loop here that we have to close? It's a big argument here. Yet I've seen enough to say that yes, both can be operative. It depends on, I think, the need, the objective at the time. So if I'm looking at it from a scientific point of view, I want to be precise. I want to be able to know that this result does match the objective, whether it's a real spot or whether a photograph of a real spot that we then later use to evaluate.
Mm.
So science, you're just looking at the proof of principle thing.
Yeah.
But in if you want to, you may want to take this a step further in terms of applying it. Yeah, so there's questions here. There's a lot we don't know about this phenomenon. Yet we also know enough to say that given certain circumstances, we get results that can be acted on, and you can go find things, or you can describe things.
Right.
And I think one example, another one, real quickly, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We were able to locate my colleague that I worked with. I was able to locate a missing airplane. No other way in which it could have been located, or had not been for the information we provided. So it was information and that location that was accurate. But the airplane was found. Now, had the airplane, there's no other way you could have found the airplane. So, so what?
Right.
Yeah, so we were able to do it. And so I don't know how to describe the timing, but it
This
worked.
is where I almost feel so frustrated with these um I'd say cynics, where you're going, yeah, but okay, I understand uh, like a peer-reviewed journal is gonna rip certain studies to pieces because rightly when you apply certain standards, it's very, very difficult to prove. And I think there is enough evidence, yeah,
Mhm.
out there. And they still, yeah, they still don't want to believe that it happens because they want to experience themselves. And if they see, I think I'm listening to Joe McMonagle's Stargate Chronicles, and he says you're on a hiding to nothing because if you prove it, they say it's if you do a remote viewing for them, they say it's a fluke and a guess. If you fail, they say, well, of course it
Mhm.
doesn't work. Yeah. And of course, not every time, it's not every time you're right because the mind is a tricky thing.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
quantum physics is based on probabilities. So not everything's in the field of remote viewing or any form of psychic field. You shouldn't, nobody should say it's going to be 100%. There may be some probability functions here we don't fully grasp yet. So it's not always going to be as accurate as you'd like. And you may have information that's useful, but you may not realize it till years later, even. So the time elements enter into the picture as well. So, and people, if they don't really want to believe in this, they're not going to believe the data, no matter how accurate it is. They'll find some rationale to
right.
down. So we just decide, I've done this a long time ago, and so do my colleagues, you can take it or leave it. But if you really want to, if you really are serious, then try it yourself or work with people that can do this.
Yeah, that's a very, I started to do that as well. Instead of having an argument, say, well, look, you try, yeah,
Yeah.
and they'll have an experience or they won't, and actually, one of the things I want to ask you was, um, oh yeah, how at the moment there's a sort of and I'm not a big follower of the remote viewing scene. I'm not.
Mhm.
I mean, it might seem like I am, but like I don't read every post that comes up in the millions of, groups, and I don't read every comment. But there seems to be certainly more of a movement to either selling our psychic abilities back to us, yeah, which is fine, by the way. Um, or with AI, I believe actually it's we're at a point where the area that humans can grow into is our psychic abilities because our cognitive abilities are going to be in some ways taken on by the computers. They're going to tell us how to reason things. They're going to tell us, what is the right answer to a lot
Mhm.
of things. And yet we have this ability which goes directly to another answer we wouldn't be expecting. So I was curious. I'm sorry, I've asked you two questions. I think I must be the worst interviewer, but yeah, I've asked you two questions at the same time, probably
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, well, I think the AI issue is really an important one, and I think ultimately we may even learn something from how complicated and how involved and convoluted AI evolves. We might learn something about how our own brain works from how what's going on in AI processing. Is really weird stuff when you think about it. So I can see that aspect, but also as it becomes more complex then maybe there may be the maybe the mental aspects, our minds might be able to interact more directly with an AI system. I don't know. Yeah, I'm really way out here, but it might be easier to have a mind machine interface, for example. Going back to the random event generator concepts, where the random output of this random event generator can can be varied according to the intention. Do you want to have more zeros or more ones based on the quantum nature of the noise generating output within the device? So there really is a little bit of an interaction there already.
That
But
that's
with
psychokinesis. That's when a device has been generated to create completely, statistically completely random numbers, and then people have used their intentions to shift it from completely random.
Yes, right. And there's this global consciousness research project too that was set up many years ago. It originated at Princeton University with Roger Nelson and his colleagues. It is still a very active, and is an active organization where they have these random event generators at different locations worldwide and consolidating their data and analyzing shifts in randomness or tendency toward randomness based on events that are occurring or will occur. Like for the 9/11 tragic event, the data when it compiled showed shifts prior to the event. So is there a global consciousness then that we are all part of? This is kind of what it would suggest. So here we are.
Yeah, I mean, the
Young
Chinese the Chinese idea of energy,
Mhm.
everything has energy, so everything is connected. So, like,
Yeah.
of course, yeah. Um, but I mean, I haven't met anybody. I'd love to meet somebody who can tell me about the Chinese psychic programs, but I very much doubt I'm going to meet somebody.
Yeah, also like to know more about that myself. So I know that years ago when I did look into it, there was really quite a bit of interest, particularly with younger people that had certain abilities of describing things inside or moving things. It was very fascinating. Of course, we don't know what the controls were on the experiments. There's always that issue of controllability and
Hmm.
um, there's something that could have affected it from the environment. So you have to really concern when you really want to come in with a really specific scientific evaluation of these things. If in the case of remote viewing or any form of psychic data, you do have records and you do have
Yeah.
ways affirming, assuming your controls are valid and nobody could alter the records and all that. So it's fairly easy if you follow the protocol to do it properly. It's much more difficult in some of these energetic experiments, but it can be done. And maybe there's a lot more going on than I'm aware of right now, and it probably is. So that's an area in the future, I think, and AI. developments may have a role in that, and may
mm,
facilitate it, even if it only allows the analysis of the data to be quicker and more accurately done.
mm,
That would be an accomplishment in itself.
mm.
And involved in a project right now where we're looking into that possibility with some of my colleagues. Oh,
Cool.
there's a lot here that really needs to be done.
We could talk for another hour on that. I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, like, are you teaching the stuff? Are you, I mean, do people, does a normal person come and say, "Oh, I have a dream consultation with Dale Graff"? Is that a possibility?
Well, when I left the government and retired, I did have programs. I did have workshops. Some of them went a whole week, where I combined both dreams and remote viewing. I did that for about 12 years. I did not, put up a big flag and say, "Look, here I am. Come to me." I was not in it, to make a lot out of it. I just wanted to learn myself and worked with a few people. So I did that for about a dozen years. But then I shifted over to do independent research, and I don't really do that anymore. But I do have a dream. People do come to me about dream work, and I try to give them basic hints. And occasionally I do local area projects with individuals, or even workshops, but not that many. It's fun. I like to do it. It's fun, but I'm too caught up right now in research and in writings to do that. But I had done that, yes, and so yes, I've done that.
Very cool. Okay, so right now you're really a researcher and a writer.
I guess you could say that is what my focus is. Yes.
Mm,
Um, sure. And, I talk with people, I explain things, but I don't have a shingle out to say, "Here's what I do. Call me at a certain number." I don't have that. But like I said, one time I did, but a very low profile. Uh, Hopefully, what I write and do in presentations, it conveys the concepts and the nature behind it and how you can go about it. Dream work isn't really that difficult to do,
right.
and to dreams and work with them. Now, if you're jumping into dreams from the point of view of self-help and that angle, yeah, that will take a lot of work because you want to make sure that what you're working with, is it some surface dream? Is it something really that goes deeper? Is it something diagnostics that's bubbling up in you that you need to um, see what the significance of that symbol or that dream is? That's a little more difficult than, say, working precognitively because
Yeah,
there the objective is straightforward. What's going to happen tomorrow on a certain place. It's
yeah.
pretty straight. So, but the big issue in any, whether it's dream work or remote viewing or any form of psychic work, is the interpretation of the data.
Mm,
You may get good data, but it's not exactly that clear of the meaning of it. So there is interpretation that I think are some issues. I see individuals post things claiming that they had top-notch remote viewers or top-notch psychics on them, but then their conclusions that they come from this data that seem to be 90 degrees off from what I would have done with the same information.
right.
So I think there's some individuals push the boundaries of how they interpret this, particularly if the tasking or if the objective behind it has to do with what we used to call esoteric targets. That's information that you really can't evaluate anyway. We don't have a ground truth per se. Just speculation. So those are difficult ones to interpret properly. Um, it's difficult enough working with routine projects. What did that really mean? Is that symbolic, or is it representative, or is it something approximating the reality? But as you work more and more with the information, you can hone it down better. and have more accuracy, or I should say more reality come into the perceptions.
Right.
And hopefully the perceptions you come up with then will be understood by those that have the tasking levied on you. So you don't have to do this yourself per se as a viewer or as a program manager of the viewer. That's you're blind to it anyway in principle. So you know,
Right.
but
Can I
people
ask you
take
a question? Because I want to ask you a question which is more very practical, and maybe some viewers here, some subscribers.
yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
what is there something that we can do to increase our chances of being psychic? If somebody said like, okay, there's one thing I'd like to do which would increase my chance of being psychic. Do you have any advice, or is there any indications that there is something we could do to be more psychic?
Well, I think, yeah, there's several things. You can certainly, if you come to that point, like you're now describing, then you overcome a major barrier because you're saying, yeah, it's possible. I really would
Mm,
like to move
mm.
forward. That's a big step that you just cited there.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that would be a hurdle number one, so to speak, a goal number one to get to really believe that uh, and you feel it in your gut. This is really what I want to do. Now what I want to do. So you may have to go through some. Uh, I don't want to say self-analysis here, but it's always nice to step aside for a moment and say, well, even if I do that, what am I doing it for? How will I actually use this ability that I hope to be developing more of, which I already have a piece of. I just want to develop more of it. I think it's useful to go through that exercise and ask yourself, what am I
right,
going, how am I going to benefit myself and others? And I see some training programs out there, and I don't think they give a lot of attention to that. And I think that's unfortunate because it could lead a little bit to a little bit of the ego stuff. I think you alluded to that earlier. Um, so I think it's nice to be grounded is a term that's commonly used in the metaphysical community to be a little better grounded. Self-aware and your own purposes. So if you have that grounding, then what you then to progress on to then with the intention, people can go different ways here. Myself, I know, and some of my colleagues, we're much into nature. We enjoy the walking in the forest. We go to a park, go to a river, music that's relaxing. Those kinds of things to put you into a naturalistic feeling that you're
yeah,
connected with the
yeah.
world around you, the universe. So you can start thinking big here that I'm part of this universal field. Concepts like that are helpful because it
Okay, yeah,
allows you to move beyond your little self-centered ego, which you have to do anyway to get into this process to begin with. So, so yeah, if you go through these exercises
hmm,
and other things you can do too, are having an artistic flair is useful because there's something creative about this process.
hmm, absolutely. Hmm.
No, at one time I took art courses, not just because I wanted to be a good artist, but which I'm not, but I did enough to draw good sketches. But it allows you to allow the other side of the brain to be having a little bit more
Right,
involvement in your activities. So being creative like that, and putting the judgmental logical stuff to the side a little bit, like Jung talked about in some of his scales, and the Myers-Briggs test inventory has identified for us. So you place some of
right.
these logical stuff to the side. Then you don't want to become non-logical. That can come later when you look at the data.
Yeah.
So yeah, these little exercises, and then just to simply into occasion for me, what worked for me when I got back and did this more consistently, but periodically throughout the day, you remind yourself, oh, hey, listen, this is the day, the evening, the night that I want to go a little further on this and whatever objective
Hmm.
you have. I want to see if I can experience a little bit of that and describe some scene that I don't know about. You have to practice this stuff. You have to have something easy to do. And initially, what I did, it worked real well for me, was there's a certain magazine that had subscribed to at the time that was just perfect for this. And it was just the Smithsonian magazine because you could never predict what the type of article would be. You could never consciously know before you open up the magazine the kind of photographs that might be in it. And it was a nice balance between text and picture. So it was a really wonderful place for random targets.
Mm.
I used this magazine without opening it and saying, okay, tonight or this evening or tonight is the night I want to perceive what's on page 72. So when I
Right,
open,
yeah, that's really nice. That's very. I think that's fantastic advice.
yeah,
I think you've really, if I could make a clip of the whole video, what you've just said in these, I think five, 6 points, that's my highlight. Thank you,
yeah,
Dale. That's amazing.
no, you can get pages that are really nothing, but that's okay. Then there's some pages that are really wonderful and you really nailed it so beautifully. So that's really the great feeling. And even the ones that are nothing are worthwhile. Like a couple of times, a page would show up that had no picture on it, it's just words. And those words also came through in the perceptions. And this is one of the issues which I'm looking at right now with some research project. I think remote viewing research early on and didn't pursue this in enough depth. But I think we do have the ability not only to have impressions that are accurate in the visual field by drawing it and sketching it, but also by having words and numbers uh, appear or that we can identify through this. So that's another aspect of it. But nevertheless, getting back to what you talked about, having this kind of setup, it worked for me, and I'm glad you liked it. You can also use National Geographic, but they're a little busy in the pages, almost
Right.
too much.
Yeah.
But it could be any kind of magazine, not
Right,
one.
right. No, I mean the 5 points: connecting with nature, connecting with yourself, grounding yourself, becoming
Yeah,
more artistic. I mean, like, and then having this daily, like 3 times a day, like
sure.
setting an intention. I mean
Yeah.
that's
Well,
fantastic. It's
and
brilliant.
also, I also remember it's nice to be in good physical shape too. If
Right.
you have nagging illness or pain, that's going to come through and distort you a little bit, maybe or slow you down. So you want to make sure that you have your body in order,
Hmm.
uh, best as you can. I'm not saying you have to cut out everything you do, but just watch a diet and whatever beverages you might like to have. Or at least the times that you want to do the practice, the experiment. So you don't have to you don't have to go out and do heavy body weightlifting, but
No.
just simple routine
Yeah.
physical exercise. Those again, that has to do with balance, and you respect yourself when you're this way, and you respect the universe around you.
Yeah.
So, anyways, it's this attitude here that's in others. So, there's a number of things, and we all are variable on this. But and people that come in differently they may not need some of this because they already have more of a developed ability. It's just a matter that they have to do
Yeah.
something to refine that. But it's always nice to have a balanced idea behind this. Um,
Exactly. Dale, I thank you so much. I mean, you've covered so much ground. It's been amazing. I think I'd love to keep an eye on the comments that come in. Maybe there's some questions which will come up, and maybe
okay,
we can
fine.
follow up again. I mean, it's a great privilege for me to talk with somebody that has so much dedication and so much passion to continue with the research over decades. Thank you so much.
Okay, right. Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking to you, and you have really good insight yourself. So don't forget that either. So that's great. Okay.